Now, you didn't really think that I was going to break tradition and do only one Treehouse of Horror review this year, did you? I typically do 2 Treehouse of Horror episodes per year, so tail end of Halloween season, let's just get Treehouse of Horror 6 on the table. In general, the Treehouse of Horror episodes are a cut above many other Simpsons episodes, at least in terms of rewatch value. This is likely because they were mostly kept out of regular syndication until Halloween season. Like, there were exceptions. Sometimes you'd run into one in syndication in the middle of like April. I remember being a kid and that being like the most exciting thing that could happen, like a Halloween episode coming on nowhere near Halloween. So of course when I rewatch The Simpsons, yeah, I'm gonna rewatch a bunch of episodes that I like and maybe a few that I didn't quite like so much before but might be able to find a new appreciation for. But when the Treehouse of Horror episode starts and it's nowhere near Halloween, I kind of just get a flashback to that moment from childhood and it gives me some kind of second-hand giddiness. With that being said, Treehouse of Horror 6 is an unfortunate episode because while it is featured in what is considered to be one of, if not the best seasons of the entire run of The Simpsons, the episode is not considered to be one of, if not the best Treehouse of Horror episodes. It's kind of like the unfortunate circumstances behind 4, where it's just wedged between 2 great Halloween specials and might feel kind of weak when watched in a marathon. However, while Treehouse of Horror 4 has some standout moments that can sometimes make it contend for second best, Treehouse of Horror 6 is forced to follow up the actual greatest Treehouse of Horror episode of all time. And to add to that, the 7th one that followed is very highly regarded as well. So I mentioned that Treehouse of Horror 5 retired many of the presentation concepts found within the early Treehouse of Horror episodes, such as the Word of Warning intro and the graveyard sequence. The wraparound segments were done away with in 4, but given kind of a parody send-off in 5. Treehouse of Horror 6 started a whole new kind of presentation ethic, and that ethic was to keep the intro as short as possible and devote as much time as they could to the segment. I do remember being a bit jarred by this opening because I was not used to them just doing an opening like this for a Simpsons episode. Keep in mind, a lot of these earlier Simpsons episodes I watched for the first time in syndication, and many of the times that I did watch them, I wouldn't really catch them right at the opening credits. So most of the time I got into this episode usually around the start of the first story or sometimes in the middle. So when I actually sat down as a kid and watched it start to finish, this I wouldn't say it scared me, but it definitely threw me off. It's quick and it's simple. It's a parody of something horror related. It's just Krusty as the Headless Horseman throwing his head at the screen, and then it cuts to one of the best Halloween couch gags ever. I can give it that credit. It accomplishes what it set out to accomplish. It accomplished introducing the episode without taking too much time before throwing us directly into the first segment, which is Attack of the 50-Foot Eyesaurs. Attack of the 50-Foot Eyesaurs is kind of a parody of those like giant monster or Kaizo movies, but it's also kind of a shot at those cheesy 50s B movies. It all starts because Homer is upset that the colossal donut being advertised is just a regular donut.
I want a colossal donut, just like the one on the sign. Donuts! That's false advertising!
And he decides to take revenge on Lard Lad by stealing the giant donut atop the Lard Lad statue for some apparent reason. It cuts to the point really fast, and it shows why maybe the increased focus on making the segments fit into the small time frame that was confined by all the fanfare of the previous episodes might have actually resulted in better quality segments, because like I'm not saying this is bad, but it seems like they're just really trying to get it out of the way, and it's like, guys, you have more time. Basically, due to what is, according to the radio, an ionic disturbance in the Van Allen belt, which I know that's a reference to something, I just don't remember what, lightning strikes Lard Lad and presumably the other giant advertisements, and they come to life and start running amok, with Lard Lad searching for his lost donut. Basically, Attack of the 50-Foot Eyesaurs is a heater segment. It throws you into a wacky, chaotic scenario where giant advertisements are destroying Springfield. I think my favorite part of this segment is Brockman getting killed by the giant advertisement of himself, because the way it's framed and boarded is just classic. He's oblivious to what's going on, and we see like the statue just come down and then like come back up. I actually really like how they did this. And we don't exactly see what's happening to him, but the sound design says it all.
Like so many others, let me go! No! Stop! No!
There isn't a lot of meat to this segment. It is just pure chaos and eye candy, but it does have one of my favorite gags in Simpsons history, where Chief Wiggum shoots the captain of the high school basketball team.
Ah, they're not so tough. Chief, that wasn't a monster. That was the captain of the high school basketball team.
Yeah, well, he was turning into a monster, though.
And I'll go ahead and say I also get a cheap laugh out of Marge thinking that giving Lard Lad his donut back will end everything, and it just causes him to smash everything with said donut. It's a nice little kind of table flip on Marge being the voice of reason, having it blow up in her face for once.
Don't you ever get tired of being wrong all the time?
Sometimes.
It's funny and chaotic, but it's kind of slammed to the ground by the reality of them having to cram 3 segments into a 22-minute time frame. And as a result, we get a quick ending where Paul Anka and Lisa sing a song that takes people's attention away from the advertisements with the rhetoric that once people stop paying attention to advertising campaigns, they become less effective and die. I remember reading somewhere that Paul Anka also voiced the advertising executive, but I don't see anything else on that, and I think it was probably just Dan Castellaneta or something. The musical number is a little bit catchy, but it's in a string of seasons with much better musical numbers. Also, we get the obligatory Kang and Kodos appearance. The funny thing is, there's actually a deleted scene with Kang and Kodos that has some of it left in the final episode. We see their UFO flying by the giant advertisements, but in the original cut of the episode, they were supposed to get eaten by the giant Paul Bunyan. So we see this UFO, and then later on we just see them trying to hitchhike to Earth Capital. We're still kind of in that era where the Kang and Kodos cameo had to be like crammed in there at the last minute. In the end, the power of music conquers the giant billboards, and somehow Kent Brockman is still alive despite being ripped apart by the giant advertisement of himself. And looking back, I honestly have mixed feelings on this segment. It's a good segment, it's entertaining and funny, but you really see how they were stepping away from the horror focus of the previous episodes and going more into a zany, fun territory. Which is fine, sometimes you want to have some not so spooky Halloween segments. I guess this is around they were realizing kids were really into the show, they wanted to kind of turn down the intensity since last year's episode was such a fucking traumatic experience for kids. And it would be a fool's errand to try and outdo Treehouse of Horror 5 last year, but the sad thing is this kind of set the stage for what the Halloween specials would become later down the road. It's enjoyable, but I can't see myself rating this any higher than a 6 out of 10, so it's just very slightly above average.
Because the next advertisement you see could destroy your house and eat your family.
We'll be right back.
The next segment is the powerhouse segment of the episode, and as you can tell by the thumbnail image, it's the one that I like the most. It's a good old-fashioned Nightmare on Elm Street parody. Now this is what Treehouse of Horror is all about, parodying horror, and while it is a lot zanier, it works because the Nightmare on Elm Street series was known for being rather zany, especially later in its run. It's the same basic premise, kids are encountering Willie in their dreams, and they don't know why, but the build-up to it pays a great homage to one of the most iconic horror franchises of all time. And it has one of my favorite Treehouse of Horror scenes of all time. This is definitely on the same level as the captain of the high school basketball team. We've already seen Willie is the killer in the opening with Bart, and you know, we've established that the other kids are dealing with Willie too, but then we have when Martin finishes his test and takes a nap in class. He becomes the wondrous wizard of Latin, only to be met by Willie. This whole sequence pays a great homage to the character of Freddy Krueger, and Martin's death is fucking glorious. So I actually saw this before I saw Nightmare on Elm Street, and if that doesn't surprise you, I talk a bit more about it later in the video. But as I got older and started watching those kinds of movies, I really started to put the pieces together, and the weirdest thing that I noticed is that Martin's death is actually a parody of 2 key scenes from the series. The whole wizard thing is based on Will Stanton, who was the wizard master in Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, The Dream Warriors. However, the actual death that he suffers is very similar to Sheila from Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4, The Dream Master, who dies of an asthma attack after Freddy sucks all the air out of her lungs. Whoever did this was legitimately a fan of the series, and I appreciate the little nod to it. Like, the way Martin reacts to that death, like, the way Russi Taylor did that voice, it's like, it's supposed to be fucking scary, but because it's The Simpsons, and because Nelson laughs at him right after, it's like one of the funniest fucking things ever. And that pales in comparison to what happens after he dies, which is just, like, one of the funniest fucking things I've ever seen. Fun fact, I once saw a guy die of a crack overdose in the middle of the street, and when they were loading his carcass, he seized up and looked exactly like Martin does on the gurney here. Living in the city City desensitizes you to like actual death. It's kind of bad. And yes, for anybody from Toronto that may come across this video, this did happen at Queen and Sherbourne. But like every aspect of how they do this is like horrifying and hilarious. Like the flailing, him falling over while Nelson laughs, it's just the closest this episode comes to capturing the dark humor of previous installments.
Wheel him out quietly. It's best the children don't see him. Oh, just get it out of here. Not into the kindergarten.
So rather than make Willie a child killer or child molester like Freddy Krueger was, because they wouldn't be able to do that in this, he was killed due to the poor budget of the school.
Get him $12 for doorknob repair.
Hey!
They charge fire extinguishers. Now this is a free service of the fire department.
Hey!
As someone who started school with a school system that had somewhat of a budget that's slowly whittled down over the years, I laugh at this way more than I should. Granted, I don't think they had parents coming in to discuss how the budget would be spent at the school that I went to, but the fact that everybody in Springfield just literally does not want to spend any money for anything is fucking hilarious. Because yes, the school system can be this cheap. And the whole thing with Milhouse's dad and the 2 spaghetti meals is like a total meme today, but like, parents legitimately have skewed priorities sometimes. There's a man literally burning to death because of the school's poor budget, and all Kirk can think about is like, I don't like Milhouse having 2 spaghetti meals in one day.
I, for one, would like to see the cafeteria menus in advance, so parents can adjust their dinner menus accordingly. I don't like the
Milhouse having 2 spaghetti meals.
2 spaghetti meals. 2 spaghetti meals. 2 spaghetti meals. 2 spaghetti meals. 2 spaghetti meals. 2 spaghetti meals.
I hope she made lots of spaghetti.
2 spaghetti meals.
And all of this happens because Willie is burned by the furnace thanks to Homer fucking around with the heat, and he vows revenge on the children of the people who caused his death.
You'll pay for this with your children's blood!
Oh, right. How you gonna get him? Skeleton power?
I'll strike where you cannot protect them! In their dreams!
This is another one of those Treehouse of Horror moments. Like, I personally wasn't affected by this one, but I remember kids being kind of freaked out by Skeleton Willie, and I can kind of see where they're coming from. The way they drew him is really kind of creepy and off-putting. But I must say, it's kind of nice after getting killed off in every segment of the last year's special, Willie kind of gets his receipt and gets to be the killer. But again, the short runtime confines this episode, and we don't really get to see Willie do much before the climax where Bart goes into the dream world to kill him. I really do like the coloring and the shading they used for the dream world version of the school. It looks pretty close to how A Nightmare on Elm Street would look, and of course, in a fun twist, Maggie saves the day. A Nightmare on Evergreen Terrace is easily the best segment in this episode, and I'm dropping a 10 out of 10 because it perfectly captures the look and feel of the Nightmare on Elm Street series, but it adds that Simpsons twist to it. And I would go ahead and say it's probably the best looking segment in the episode. Also, I did mention this in my top 10, but for the longest time I didn't notice until it was pointed out to me that in the opening, when it pan whips to Bart playing frisbee with Santa's little helper, you can just very briefly see Willie standing outside the frame. It's a pretty creepy thing when you've never noticed it before. Nevertheless, I can go ahead and say that this segment is the highlight of a somewhat lackluster Treehouse of Horror, and you won't change my mind.
2 spaghetti meals.
And the next segment is, oh, fuck me. Homer Cubed, or Homer 3, whatever you want to call it, is a really nostalgic segment because at the time there hadn't really been anything like this on TV. But at its core, all Homer Cubed is a tech demo displaying what animation would become in the future. The 3D animation was done by Pacific Data Images. Pacific Data Images would later be bought out by DreamWorks, who would go on to be one of the pioneers in 3D animated movies along with Pixar. But aside from a few funny lines here and there and a reference to the movie Tron, all of this is just a demonstration of 3D animation with very little substance. I don't hate this segment, but as I got older, it became very apparent that all of this was just a showcase for animation that would become dated just a few years after this episode aired. I'm sure it was groundbreaking at the time, but just a few years later you'd be getting video games that looked 100 times better than this. To put into perspective how quickly this whole segment aged itself, Toy Story came out less than a month after this first aired, and Toy Story changed the game forever when it came to 3D animation. The Simpsons has always had a rule about not aging itself, and for the most part it's actually followed that rule. Like, most of the episodes still are somewhat relevant today, or at least understandable. But Homer Cubed ages the show so badly. I appreciate its contribution to the future of animation. It helped kind of sell studios on 3D animation early on, and for the time it does look good, but I can't help but feel that by doing this they kind of just took away the chance to do another great Treehouse of Horror story. It's definitely cool as a historical relic, but not so much as a Treehouse of Horror segment. I do, however, use the fat air line quite frequently, and some of the slapsticky shit is pretty funny, but in all honesty, the most memorable part of the segment is the Tron reference. It ages itself and the writers, but in the funniest way possible, because I guess back in the day, Tron was kind of like a cult movie that became forgotten in the 90s. So after Homer asks,
Did anyone see the movie Tron?
No.
No. No.
No.
No.
No.
Yes. I mean, no.
everyone confirms that they in fact did not see Tron. This is a much funnier example of the show aging itself, because yeah, Tron was this like semi-obscure 80s cult movie by Disney when this came out, but then Tron ended up experiencing a resurgence in popularity in the 2000s. There was the game Ricochet by Valve that was heavily based on Tron, that was a legendary bomb, and then Family Guy referenced Tron all the time, and after a while the Tron universe appeared in Kingdom Hearts, and there actually ended up becoming a renewed interest in Tron, leading to a sequel with another Tron movie currently in development. I think Tron is pretty cool, it's really 80s, and much like this segment, shows a pretty neat look at early special effects and animation techniques that would become commonplace today. I always felt bad for Homer when I was a kid watching this. Like, I didn't understand that the Treehouse of Horror episodes weren't canon, nor did I understand the concept of new and old episodes when I was really young, so when I first saw this, I thought this was like the canon ending to the series. I always felt a little bit sad after it, and like the Philip Glass music kind of adds to that. It's like, oh, this is kind of depressing. If I had to rate Homer Cubed, nostalgia's kicking in here, but then the episode's age balances it out, I would definitely give it a 4.5 out of 10. Slightly below average, but despite being lackluster, it does have its place as a valuable marker in history of animation. But I can't give it an average rating because it really under-delivers on what one is to expect from a Treehouse of Horror segment. It's not really scary, it's not really funny. Like, it is funny, but it's not like over-the-top funny like you would expect from The Simpsons, and once the novelty of the 3D animation wears off, it really doesn't have anything to offer on a rewatch.
You'll have to jump!
Piece of cake, son.
As a whole, what would I rate Treehouse of Horror 6? Well, it's a tough one because not only was the special before it casting a huge shadow over it, the special that followed it does so as well. Trying to put that aside, I think 6 took the concept of Treehouse of Horror in a direction that was detrimental to the quality of the series, and it felt like a lot of what was established in the previous specials being stripped away made this feel less special. Despite having a 10 out of 10 segment in the middle, the start and finish segments are at best okay. So all in all, I'd probably rated a 5.5 out of 10 at best. It's watchable, but it's probably like out of the early Treehouse of Horror episodes, like the one I look least forward to rewatching, and that's including the first one. It's safe to say there's nothing really special about this Halloween special. What Treehouse of Horror 6 does is it tries to set itself apart from its predecessors by making the format more story-driven, but in taking away the fanfare of the previous episodes, it feels more empty. Like, it's not a special, it's just another episode in the season, and while the following specials would utilize the new format better, it would soon fall into a formula very similar to this one that it would never really recover from. I hate to have to do this to a season 7 episode because like most season 7 episodes are a cut above the rest, but I just really don't find myself liking this one like on a rewatch as much as the other ones. Like, I'm gonna obviously have to do a tier list at some point, probably when I've exhausted all the prime Simpsons Halloween episodes, but like take yourself to Halloween, which it is Halloween right now, and just think about the marathon that you have. It's like 1, you know, it's a little bit slow. It's a season 2 episode, but it has some special moments to it. It has James Earl Jones, and that makes it worth watching. Then you get to 2. 2 is the weird one. They're still finding their footing, but it has some really funny moments in it, and one of the best segments of all time, as well as that hilarious twist ending. Treehouse of Horror 2 was the first one to establish that the Treehouse of Horror episodes were not in the canon of The Simpsons, and that the rules could be broken. Then you get to 3. 3 is the one where they found their footing. They knew what they wanted out of these Treehouse of Horror episodes, and that was to blend horror and comedy together. It provides 3 great segments, some wraparound segments that are very good, and is all around at least the second best Treehouse of Horror of all time. Then you get to 4. 4 is the black sheep. They were kind of trying to do away with the wraparound segments, but not really. But it does have 3 really good stories, some pretty funny moments, and a good tinge of horror thrown into it. And then 5 is bar none the best Treehouse of Horror episode ever made. Then you get to 6, and 6 feels like, you know, they were resetting, they were restarting. It was the first season show run by Oakley and Weinstein, and it was their first Halloween special that they had to do by themselves. Despite being in one of the best seasons by one of the best showrunners, it's just kind of lackluster, and I hate to have to say it, but out of the originals, it is definitely the worst one. Because then 7 and 8, which I would consider those the last 2 classic Treehouse of Horror episodes, just are bangers in their own right. This is obviously just my opinion. Like, if you like Treehouse of Horror 6, all the power to you. I do like it, I just definitely think it is the weakest one. It's really just held up by the Nightmare on Elm Street parody, and that could be mostly just nostalgia because this is the episode that turned me on to Nightmare on Elm Street. And movies like A Nightmare on Elm Street are the reason why I make videos today. So while Treehouse of Horror 6 does have its place, I personally do not like it that much. And what did you think of Treehouse of Horror 6? Let me know in the comments. Do you think I'm wrong saying it's the weakest one out of the originals, or is there something I'm missing here? Just, you know, yell at me, insult me, or approach the situation rationally and with a nuanced opinion. So yeah, that was my review of Treehouse of Horror 6. I figured I kind of had to cram it in at the end because I usually do the 2 Treehouse episodes as I mentioned, and I felt that it goes good with my Nightmare on Elm Street 40th anniversary review. So if you like this video, subscribe, drop me a like, leave me a comment, and that is the true end to Halloween season. Happy Halloween, bitches. Hey wait, isn't there an election coming up?
2 spaghetti meals. Spaghetti meals.